Twitter. Tonight, we are very happy to have with us this evening. Got it? Miss Natalie Moore and It's a Match, the Guide to Finding Lasting Love. But here to introduce Ms. Moore is a friend and colleague. Ms. Judith Bishop is a broadcast journalist. She often reported on the arts for WLRN, the NPR radio station here in Miami. Earlier in her career, she was a television producer in New York. Please give her a nice, warm welcome, Ms. Judith Bishop.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Natalie Moore is the author of this new book, It's a Match, The Guide to Finding Lasting Love. She's a marriage and family therapist. She's an expert in relationship counseling and also an expert in dating and in marriage. After her own experience of coping with divorce, Moore, who is a Harvard graduate and runs her own financial firm that focuses on estate planning, went back to school, and she earned a master's degree in marriage and family therapy right here at the University of Miami. Through years of working with clients, Moore has developed a psycho-spiritual approach to relationships. She's also developed her 4 levels of love. It's a model for finding and for keeping lasting relationships. This system will help single readers prepare for and then embark upon the search for a new relationship. And it will help those in established relationships to forge an even stronger bond. A resident of Miami, Moore is the mother of 2 sons. They are here with us tonight, ages 23 and 27. And in addition to all of her therapy credentials, she is a clinical hypnotherapist, also a founding member and fellow at the Harvard Institute of Coaching. She was recently named, this is broad breath from Harvard to online, she was recently named by the Online Dating University as one of the top 10 relationship dating bloggers to be followed on Twitter. So please welcome Natalie Moore.
Thank you, Judy. Well, tonight is a very special night for me. And I want to thank you all for coming to help me celebrate the Florida launch of my book, It's a Match, The Guide to Finding Lasting Love. I'm particularly here at Books and Books because Coral Gables has been my home for most of my 33 years living here in Florida. So I'm very honored to be celebrating at my favorite bookstore. I first thought about writing this book about 10 years ago. But I found that I first needed to get a lot more real-life experience to make the book relevant for all of you. I mean, I had a training in marriage and family therapy, but that was a lot of theory and fixing someone else's problems. So I had to make it work for myself before I could teach it. In a way, this book is about my own personal journey, because everything that's in it, I have done, and I know that it works. Writing this book became a calling for me because I wanted to seriously impact people's lives in a positive way and help empower everyone to find happiness. So now that I've been there and done that, let me tell you that I know that finding and keeping lasting love is possible for everyone. And yes, that means all of you. I wanted to write a comprehensive guide to finding, getting, and keeping lasting love that was different from anything that was in the market. And what I found was that most books that were written, that were out there, were either too academic or they were written by people who just wrote about their own experiences. So when I was in the process of dating and doing all of that, there was no book to help me. So I figured the market really needed that book. So I wrote the book that's based upon theory and my own experiences. And what I did to make it a guide, I wrote a table of contents that was 9 pages long. So if you wanted to look up a particular subject, you could go exactly to that page. So it's meant to be used throughout your dating life and even relationship life. And so it's very easy to find what you're looking for when you need it. Hold on. Sorry about that. The reason I wanted to write this book was to help everyone find a better match by becoming a better version of themselves. First, by identifying and clearing all of their limiting beliefs that interfered with their finding their lasting love. And also by clearing all old relationship stories and old ways of being so that they could stop making the same old mistakes. So for example, relationship stories are, I had a case recently where a woman kept finding projects to date. And so as she found these projects to date, she thought if she helped them enough or made them better, that they would love her because she had done so much for them. Well, she kept repeating that same story over and over again, and obviously it didn't work out. So we had to first identify her story before we could fix it. Also, the other thing, the message that I wanted people to take away is that you no longer have to be a prisoner of your past. You don't have to be a victim of your faulty parenting. All of these things are fixable, and you have to do this in order to find a better match, because otherwise you'll keep finding the same old match. I also wanted to teach people how to choose the right match, because I found that most divorces happened because subconsciously we chose subpar relationships. Obviously, we don't do it on purpose. We just don't know any better. So I wanted to help people identify what a better match was. I also wanted people to learn how to use the digital dating world. And believe it or not, I mean, it takes a lot of skills to do that. And once you found your one, I wanted to teach people healthy relationship skills, because guess what? Most of us don't have any. And you might want to know why. I started my own journey because I was the poster child of bad relationships. And you might say, yeah, really? Well, I really was. And you know, you never go through a self-therapy process unless you're really in trouble. So I decided I was tired of bad relationships, so I was going to change the way I was doing things. And why? Because I was like most of you. Because most of us have never had a healthy relationship modeled for us. I mean, if you think about your parents' relationships or your uncle's relationships, they probably weren't that healthy. And also, most of us have never had successful communication and conflict resolution skills modeled for us. I mean, most people think communication is yelling at the other person. And obviously that doesn't work too well either. So when I looked at everything, I realized I was the common denominator in all my failed relationships. I mean, frankly, the other side did something too, but I kept choosing the relationship. So I had to see, what was it about me that made me continue to choose the same Mr. Wrong over and over again? And I really knew it began with me. I had to start looking at what my beliefs were about myself. Did I think I deserved a lasting love? What did I think about relationships? Did I think all relationships were doomed to fail? And I also had to look at what I thought I deserved. Plus, I also had to look at my own fears. Was I afraid of intimacy? So once I started looking at that, I knew that with age comes wisdom. And as Rumi says, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself. There's also another reason why I wanted to look at myself. We all know about the law of attraction, and we all know that it works. The law of attraction, for those of you who don't know, says that our thoughts, beliefs, and emotions and actions create our own personal frequency vibration. Now, I know that that sounds like a lot of spiritual mumbo-jumbo to a lot of you, but there's actually science behind this now. Dr. David Hawkins, in his book, Power versus Force, actually measured the vibrational frequency of many of the emotions. And he found that they actually had some emotions such as shame and grief, and those had very low vibrational frequencies. And a lot of us carry shame with us. Then there's also a biochemist from Georgetown who discovered that our molecules store emotion. So imagine storing all that low frequency in your body. Okay, so the law of attraction also says people who share the same frequency are drawn together. So we all know the many practices, to call in the one using the law of attraction. I mean, The Secret sold billions of copies. And so we all know, unfortunately, what most people have realized is that if you use the law of attraction and you spend, let's say, 1 hour visualizing the perfect person and saying all these affirmations, guess what happens 23 hours out of the day? You're still vibrating at your same low frequency. So the 1 hour of visualization usually does not override the 23 hours of low frequency. So you usually end up attracting the same Mr. Wrong, but with a different name. So one thing we learned is that in order to manifest the optimal relationship, you have to change your vibrational frequency. And the only way to do that is by changing your mind. So in the book, I actually give you some energy psychology techniques that are very simple that you can work on yourself to clear these things. Whoops, I think I went. Yes, so I'm so sorry. I'm not very good with projectors. Okay, so next, in the process, I asked myself, why is it that some people find lasting love while most of us don't? Are they luckier? What was it about that? So about 10 years ago, I started doing an informal study, studying couples who had successful long-term relationships. The ones who've been married for 30 years and still look at each other with love in their eyes. And so I wonder, why is it that they can do that and most of the other people can't? And from my findings, I created my own model for identifying a lasting love relationship. And of course, I used what I learned in marriage and family therapy. And I called it the 4 levels of love. And what I found were that level 1 and level 2 relationships were the ones that usually ended up in divorce. And I don't know if most of you know, but 53% of Americans end up getting divorced. And I also found that level 3 and level 4 relationships were the lasting love relationships. But more about that later. Because not only did I have to find a model, but I also had to find a process for finding lasting love. So I developed a 5-step process. And of course, the first step began by looking at yourself. So it's an accurate self-assessment. You actually have to take an honest inventory of your best and worst features and identify your beliefs about yourself, others, and relationships. When you examine your limiting beliefs that interfere with your finding lasting love, you find things that are surprising. For example, you might feel like, well, nobody that good would really love me. Or, I really don't deserve that. I'm not good enough. Or whatever. Or I don't have the right look to find the right man. Or whatever it is that. So whatever you believe becomes your reality. Next, you have to make a list of the areas where you can improve. So you identify and make a list. And next, you examine your relationship history. And we talked a little bit about that with the case where the woman kept choosing projects. So, to stop bringing the wrong men or women into your life, you have to understand why. You keep being drawn to them and how you have drawn them to you. It begins by taking a good look at yourself. Okay, so now that you've looked at yourself, we move to, you have to decide what you can realistically change, what you're willing to change. Because we all know we have a lot of things that need to be changed, but you have to be willing and ready to change those things. So, for example, you might identify that you want to get in shape, change your hairstyle, or your diet. Those are the external things, and those tend to be easier. Or you might choose to address your belief that you don't deserve a lasting love. That's the hard part. So start making these changes that will make you feel better about yourself. Because the better that you feel, the more confident you are. And the more confident you are, the more attractive you become. So it's a process. And we all know that you need to make changes if you want different results, because what you've been doing obviously has not been working so far. So then we move to the search process. The search process actually begins not by going online. It begins by creating an inventory or list of qualities that you want in a mate versus a date. Now, this is really important because most people just start dating around and whatever. But a mate is somebody you want to have a lasting love with. And you would put up with a lot of qualities in a date that you would never put up with in a mate. However, what most people end up doing is they end up making a date into a mate. So unless you know what you're looking for, you will never know when you have found it. So that's why it's important to start with a list. And I know it sounds very analytical, but it's very important, unless you want to keep making the same mistakes. So once you've created your roadmap, you might consider searching for the one online in order to expand your choices exponentially. And I know that most of you are groaning right now because, yes, well, we've all had online dating nightmares. And let me tell you, I quit like 3 times. And then I realized, well, wait a second. I'm right brain and left brain, which means I'm analytical and I'm intuitive. So I said, let's use the analytical side. Obviously, what you're doing isn't working. So I decided to analyze what I was doing wrong, and I came up with the right way to do it. And what I did, based upon all of my own failures, I wrote a whole section on online dating. But why is online dating important? Online dating is now the game changer. It increases your chances of finding the one exponentially. However, as we all realize, it's a skills game. It's not intuitive. And if you want to succeed, you have to know the rules and protocols, as I learned personally. You also have to learn how to avoid the pitfalls and how to stay safe while dating online. But we must use online because before, most people only met people, their dates at the neighborhood bars or at church, or a friend introduced them. So you were very limited in the choices you had. And what most people ended up doing was they made one of those choices fit. So they settled, because what if I never meet somebody else? So those ended up in a lot of those level 2 relationships that obviously don't work. So after you go through the search process, you'll find a couple of candidates. Then we begin what I call the culling process. Now this is very important. You might narrow it down to 2 or 3 guys or 2 or 3 women. So at this point, it's the time to remember to take things slowly. Get to know somebody. And this is about having fun also. I even put in there the whole process of when you meet the person, what type of questions you should be asking on the first date to get to know them quickly. I suggest things to stay safe, like doing Google searches, which are very obvious, but also do Facebook searches. And you'd be surprised, how open people are on Facebook and that they don't have privacy settings. And you'd be surprised at what you can find. So as you're dating people, several of times. You get to see these different people in different circumstances. It's very important. So if you're taking things slowly, you can actually date 2 or 3 people at the same time. So you get to see how they act around friends, because people's true selves come out around their friends and family. And so when they're relaxed, you get to see who they really are. But also, watch how they behave in a restaurant. How do they treat a waitress? If they're arrogant and mean to a waitress, they're arrogant and mean. They could be putting on a show for you and your friends, but that tells you a lot. And also, watch and listen to what their friends say about them. Because friends will usually kid around or whatever and say things about them. And if they don't have friends, that tells you a lot. That tells you better take a run. Okay? And also, the other thing that's very important is to watch people how they react under stress. So, for example, what do they do when they're in a traffic jam? Do they yell and scream at the other drivers? Perhaps they have a little bit of an anger problem. How do they react when you, by mistake, you dump your red wine on his white shirt? All those are little clues along the way. So if you take things slowly, because you deserve this gift of friendship first, get to know them as a friend. If they're worthy as a friend, they're worthy as a mate. So it may take a couple of months to get to know each person. But be patient and enjoy the journey. Do not compromise. And during this process is where my 4 levels of love model comes into play. Okay, as I mentioned, level 3 and level 4 relationships are what make a lasting love. But what makes the levels? And what makes a successful, lasting relationship? What I found that successful relationships, they have a lot of things, such as, you have to respect each other and all of those things, but those weren't the core or most important features of these successful relationships. These relationships had a high number of shared areas of intimacies and core values. I'm going to tell you about that in a few minutes. And the more of these you share, the higher the level of your relationship. And a lasting love is found at level 3 and level 4. But besides these things, a successful relationship also requires commitment to the relationship and a lot of work. Let's talk about the 10 areas of intimacies. I bet you didn't know there were 10. Okay, in school they teach you about 6, sometimes other people teach you about 8. I actually found that there were 10. So, for the audience who's being live streamed, I'm going to mention them. The first is affection. So, not only do you have to be able to talk about these things and express your likes, but you have to be compatible in these different areas as well. For example, I liked physical attention because I grew up in a Latin household. Your parents are always touching you. And if I were to date somebody who didn't want to touch or didn't like to be touched, that would be a terrible match. But also, it's important to be able to talk about it and how it makes you feel and to ask for your needs to be met in that area. So then we have social intimacy, emotional intimacy, intellectual intimacy. And believe it or not, intellectual intimacy is important. If somebody is more intellectual than you are, as long as they can speak about it without being arrogant, then that might work. And you can share ideas as opposed to being lectured. Companionship intimacy. What are your needs for companionship? Aesthetic intimacy. How important is beauty for you? Beauty in your home or decorating your home, or art. And sexual intimacy. Sexual intimacy is not only about talking about it, but it's how compatible are you? It has to do, for example, if somebody's into BDSM, they're not going to be compatible with somebody who's, more straight-laced. But it also is about frequency. If somebody wants to have sex once a day or 3 times a day, they're not going to be compatible with somebody who wants it once a month. So these are very important things. How about spiritual intimacy? I know, boys, don't get embarrassed. I see them turning red. Okay, so there's spiritual intimacy. Spiritual intimacy for a lot of people is very important because different religions and different beliefs and how respectful you can be. But the two ones that I found were important that were not normally taught in school were financial intimacy. You know, as a financial planner, I had a lot of wives and husbands who would come in. The wife would say, I'm not coming back. I let him take care of everything. I said, well, what happens if he dies? And then, oh, well, then you'll tell me. But that's a very bad place to be. Because financial intimacy, you have to be able to talk about these things before you get married. So, for example, if you have somebody who really likes to live on the edge, have high credit card balances, and you have another person who likes to pay their bills off every month, that's a big source of contention. And you have other people who are just totally irresponsible and just leave their debts all over the place. So you need to be able to discuss these things rationally and come to some sort of agreement or compromise that works for both of you. And in many cases, you have to compromise with the more conservative person. Then the 10th, which I found very important, which was not taught in school, is work or career intimacy. Most people work 8 to 10 hours a day. I mean, let's face it, that's the modern world we live in. If you can't talk about your work and say, oh, I'm really just afraid that I'm going to get fired, or I'm having this problem at work with your spouse, in a way that you can express your fears and desires and, you know, what's going on, then, you know, that leaves 8 hours of your day that you can't discuss. So I find that in today's modern world, being able to talk about work and have that kind of intimacy is very important, and to be able to help and support your mate in that way. Okay, so what is intimacy? Because most people think intimacy is about talking about facts. Well, I hate to tell you, but it's not. Intimacy is a journey of mutual discovery between partners. It is a process of moving past discussing just the facts of one's lives to being open enough to discuss deep feelings, dreams, faults, failures, and needs. Particularly, most people are afraid to voice their needs and their fears. So let's say if I'm not getting enough physical attention from you, if I don't say anything, my mate's not going to be able to guess. So that's part of the intimacy, being able to talk about your needs in all of the areas we talked about, as well as your fears and failures and all of that. Now, the core values is pretty obvious. However, I put up this slide so that you get an idea of some of the areas, although I think I have over 200 core values in my book that you can choose. Core values are anything that you feel so strongly about that they're an integral part of your being. But a cultural reference also has to be made here. Because, for example, I recently had a case where both people said, oh, we're core value, our family is a big, strong core value for both of us. Well, guess what? She was Latin and he was American. And her son had lost his job and he was 32 years old. And she said, no problem, just move back in. That's what we Latins do. And a lot of single Latin kids still live with their parents until they get married. And that's what a Latin family does. But he was an American. And an American, family values were very strong for him. He saw his kids every week and they did things together. But in the American value system, after you're 21, you're out. So sorry, So even though you say you have a core value of family or some other core values, discuss them. Because what does it really mean for you? So the more areas of intimacies that you share, that you can talk about and feel comfortable discussing, and the more core values that you have in common, That's the higher the level of the relationship. So those level 2 relationships, which is where most people have married because they didn't know any better, it's because they confused, excuse me, my throat's a little off, they have confused shared interests. Sorry about this. Because they have confused shared interests with shared areas of intimacies and core values. Now, what do I mean by that? Usually people, let's say if they meet at work or they're colleagues in the same industry, they know the same people, they like the same sports, so they have a lot of shared interests. And they think, oh, this relationship is really going to work because we like to do the same things. Well, guess what? That usually ends up in a level 2 relationship, because if you don't have the areas of shared intimacies and the core values, your relationship is not going to last for the long term. And the long term could be 20, 30 years. And a lasting love doesn't have to be exactly marriage. It can be a long-term committed relationship or anything. So what we see, the reason my 4 levels of love model is so important for you is because divorce is the most serious disease in America. As I mentioned, it's with a 53% divorce rate. It affects all members of societies. And I wanted to teach people how to choose the right one instead of just another one. So now that you know those things that are important, as you're dating someone, you can start exploring each one of those areas and see how you fit and make a better match. I really wanted to make a difference in society by affecting the overall divorce rate, by teaching you how to avoid becoming another divorce statistic. Okay, so now that you've narrowed it down to one guy of those 2 or 3 guys or 2 or 3 women that you were dating, here's the last step. You choose one of them, the one who is your match. And of course, the successful relationships also have chemistry. Let me just put that out there, because the difference between friends and lovers is sex. So there has to be chemistry also. So in step number 5, it's about evolving your relationship. So you're still dating, but now you're trying it out one-on-one while you're dating. So as you evolve your relationship, you have to continuously evaluate it, because you get to see somebody more. And once you move in together, you get to learn more about them. How compatible are your habits? And now it's time to work on new relationship skills to avoid the same old pitfalls. A lot of times when couples come to a marriage and family therapist, it's almost too late because they're so angry at each other, because they keep falling into the same old argument and the same old traps that, they start accusing each other, making each other defensive, so they never resolve anything. So what I did in the book was I decided to give you all the relationship skills that you need so that you could evolve your relationship in a healthy way. Because again, most of us have never seen that. So I'm giving you some things here. The 4 levels of love is a dynamic model. As you know, my undergraduate degree is in economics, and we love models. And all models are dynamic, which means you have to keep working on maintaining the intimacy in all the areas. Because let's say you meet when you're 20s and 30s. By the time you're 50, you look like you're a totally different person because you keep growing. And as both of you are growing, if you don't keep talking, then guess what? You grow apart. So the dynamic part of the model is that you have to keep working on these areas of intimacies. And if you have a lower level relationship and you want to make it a higher level relationship, start working on discovering more areas of intimacies. And what happens is that the more intimate you can become with somebody, the healthier you become. And if you can't discuss be intimate with somebody in a certain area, ask yourself, why not? What is the worst thing that could happen if you expressed your fears or needs to someone? And that answer to yourself is a very fear or limiting belief you have to clear. So you go back to the part in my book about clearing your limiting beliefs. So as your relationship evolves, new fears and new limiting beliefs will also show themselves. Because believe it or not, relationships are our mirrors about the very things we need to fix within ourselves. Because they all show up, glaring us right in the face. Okay, that's my own watercolor. So that's how I relax. Okay, so here's some of the relationship skills that you will learn in It's a Match, the Guide to Finding Lasting Love. Stages of romance. Now, we all know in school there are different stages of romance, but most people don't. So what happens is everybody loves the honeymoon stage of the romance. That's when you first meet someone, the first 6 months to a year, and you look at everything through rose-colored glasses. You know, you think alike, you like the same music, everything else. Well, guess what? After that stage comes stage number 2. And that is when you start to individuate and show up as an individual within the relationship and assert your own needs and likes and to notice the other person's faults. Oh, he's not that great. You know, he's messy. He's doing this. He's not that sweet, or whatever. Oh, he has a temper. Oh, so when that transition point between the honeymoon stage and the second stage of the relationship is where a lot of people break up, because that first stage also comes with some hormones that bond you. There's sex hormones that bond you to the other person. And there are all these feel-good hormones that keep you together. Well, they're starting to wear off. That's what allows you to see the real person. So by knowing the stages of romance, you will understand that your relationship is actually evolving. And it's time to start working on it. It's not time to give up on it. The next thing is, oh yes, communication. You know, we all teach communication skills. But it's actually very simple. And so I teach you some basic things on how to communicate effectively, how to express your feelings and desires without making the other person wrong or get defensive. I mean, God forbid. So it's very easy, and it's very formulaic. So if you learn that early on, you can have conversations. And of course, these conversations sometimes devolve into arguments. So I teach how to argue effectively and how to resolve conflicts effectively. Because believe it or not, it can be done. And you can end up the argument without really feeling like you've had a fight. You can say, oh, wow, we reached some accord. And sometimes that accord can be agree to disagree. And plus, there are other relationship skills. I'll let you read the book for those. Now, the important thing to know, you know those 10 years before I wrote the book? And everything in this book I have done myself. And it wasn't pretty, you know, and it was a hard process. And I'm still doing a lot of the things myself because every day I find new things that I need to improve. So I know that this process works. And I know that you can do it. You just have to want to do it. And happiness comes when you stop making excuses and you start making changes. Because if the same old way isn't working for you, then the only way to fix it is to make changes. Hold on. Whoops. Sorry. So I know that finding and keeping your lasting love is possible for everyone, for all of you. Whether you're seeking a new relationship or desire to evolve your existing relationship, you too can have your lasting love. I want to thank you all, but first I want to tell you about a next thing that we're doing. If you're divorced and looking for love, for lasting love, not just love, I'd like to invite you to join me for a getaway at Casavelas in Puerto Vallarta. It's this May 4th through the 8th. And so there are many workshops and social events. So if you want to come and jumpstart your love life, join us there. And I also invite you to sign up for my free blog if you're interested in receiving blogs on relationships or dating advice. And if you have any questions, you can go to my website and ask questions, and I'll answer them and publish them in the blog, and while maintaining your privacy. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and I invite you all. They've extended the happy hour tonight, and so I invite you all to enjoy some wine, some great hors d'oeuvres, and I really appreciate you all coming. Thank you so much. If you all have any questions that you'd like to ask, I'll entertain some, and if not, you can catch me in the happy hour because they've asked me to mingle. Okay? We're going to go find the guy out there. Yep, that's fine.
My daughter's actually into this. She's a coach in New York. She's starting a business. She's the one. Well, my daughter, my twin daughter, she's watching a lot of her. I didn't hear that.
Folks, we have the books for sale behind the counter out front. You buy your books, Natalie will sign them right over here. Thank you so much for coming.